do you balance practicing multiple instruments or pieces? So for example, if you're preparing for an audition, you might be doing a snare solo and a marimba solo. So how do you spend your time between those two? So one thing that I highly recommend doing is front load your learning and then spread out the refinement phase. So try and get it memorized as fast as possible and get to the point where you can play from start to finish as fast as possible, and then spend the remainder of your time just refining over the time. Don't just like spread it out so that like on week 1, I'm going to learn like the first page. On week 2, I'm going to learn the second page. And then by like the very last week, I'm going to learn the last page. Don't do that. Try and learn it all as fast as possible and then spread it out. You need to be able to spread it out for the refinement so that way you can process it in your sleep. So that way your brain can memorize it faster and help you just improve it while you're sleeping. It's kind of a weird concept, but it does actually work over time, which is why when you like stay up really late to like memorize something for a test that's like in one ear out the other, it's because you didn't spend time with it and allow your brain to like process the learning in smaller chunks over an extended period of time. Instead, if you're batching it all at once and you do that, then it makes it so that you will not remember it and not be able to execute on it as well as if you spread it out over time. There are some different ways that you can go about doing this. One is like an even distribution. So you could work on them for equal parts throughout the day. So like I'm going to spend an hour on the snare solo, an hour on a marimba solo if I have like 2 hours to practice. Another way that you can do this is actually to alternate each day. So maybe you'll do like 2 hours on your snare solo and 2 hours on a marimba solo on the next day and just keep going back and forth between those two. Again, you're giving yourself time to process it in between. You will improve over time. But another way that you can approach this instead of doing like an even distribution or an even balance is to have an uneven balance, focusing on the areas that you need or want to improve more. So if you're weak in one area, focus on that more than the other one. So for example, I myself am weak on marimba compared to my rudimental chops. So if I were preparing for an audition where it required like rudimental and marimba, I'd spend more of my time on the marimba piece than I would on the rudimental stuff. But it might be the opposite for you if you have more experience with marimba as compared to rudimental. So whenever you're preparing for something, think about how fast you can learn it. Try and do that as quickly as possible. And then think about what kind of a distribution you want over time. It might start off where it is an uneven balance where you're spending more time towards marimba and less time towards snare at the beginning when you're refining things. And then by the end of it, you might have more of an even distribution where you're spending equal amount alternating each day or whatever. So experiment and figure out what works best for you, but try that out and hopefully that'll help with your preparation for auditions or for wherever it is that you're trying to improve, if it's multiple pieces or multiple instruments. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. How do you get yourself to practice when you are not motivated to practice? So life isn't like this one continuous stream of like pure motivation where you're able to just like focus on the 20% that's going to give you the 80% of the results, etc. If I spend like 10 minutes doing something that I might be wanting to procrastinate on or hesitant with like working on or just like not motivated to do, I likely end up like working through that procrastination hurdle and I'm able to just like keep going on it. So it's like once you get that momentum going, it's like, well, why would I want to stop? Like I've already like set up my drums and I'm like ready to go or warmed up or whatever. So if you can get yourself to do that, then that can help you to make consistent progress. Block off consistent time each day so that it becomes a habit. Like, well, from 8 to 10 every morning, I am specifically going to work on snare drum or marimba or whatever it is that you are going to practice. Prioritize this time so that you spend a consistent amount every single day over an extended period of time. Don't just try and batch it so that you're like a weekend warrior of drumming. Like, oh, I'm going to spend like 10 hours on Saturday. If you actually just spent like an hour a day spread across the entire week, the 1 hour a day, meaning 7 hours, would be better than 10 hours on Saturday because your brain has more time to process over each night when you are sleeping, and you'll be able to make significant gains than just doing like a larger amount of time in one sitting. Oh, another thing that like writers will do, like comedians and stuff, they talk about how when they set a certain amount of time like each day to like write or whatever, or in this case practice, go into a practice room without your phone, unless you're using one of these play-alongs. Set a constraint on yourself that I can't go on social media, I can't go online, I can't text my friends. All I'm going to do for this hour or two is either practice or do nothing. And if you can set yourself up in those kind of a constraints in an environment where that's literally your only two options is either you just practice or you do nothing, then odds are you're going to be like, well, sitting here and doing nothing is very boring unless you're like meditating or something. So I might as well practice for however much time you have. So that might help you out to be able to get through that like lack of motivation. Bass lines are unique because you can't hear the entire part without the entire section there to actually play through it. But how do you practice bass when the rest of the section isn't there? So if you're at home practicing by yourself, what can you do to work on this? So the first thing that I highly recommend is to focus on playing to your feet. You need to have your feet in time, so you need to always be using a metronome or using one of these play-alongs to make sure that your feet are in time and then your hands are playing to your feet. Okay, that's great advice and all, but what specific exercises should you work on? Timing exercises for triplet, for 16th note, for 8th note, etc. It has timestamps in the description so you can jump to whatever BPMs. So you could be like, I want to work on this at 103 beats a minute. When you click on it, it will then immediately start tapping you off. We have two different sets of sticking. One is for starting off the right, and then the bottom one is for starting off the left. Now, there's also timing transition exercises. So these exercises, if we go back to here, in the timing transition, this is going from one type of rhythm to another. So for example, 8th notes to 16th notes. Or what about 8th notes into quintuplets or fivelets? Or what about, if we scroll down, 16th notes into a 7/4 pattern. You can go there and you can work on that one. So there are 51 different videos in here that are specifically working on transitioning from one rhythm to another. A lot of these are currently members first, but they're all scheduled to release for free. So these aren't like behind a paywall or anything. It's just early access if you're a member and you want those. Now, another thing that I recommend working on are splits timing. So these exercises are really interesting in the way that they're developed, if I do say so myself. So if you want to work on, like, let's say your fours between you and another drummer, what this exercise does is it has both parts playing simultaneously, and then the next line that we're going to get to is going to mute the second part. So you can play the second part and fill it in while you're practicing this. You can hear drum one. And then the last two lines right here, it actually has it so that it meets the first part, so you can hear how does the second part sound and get the proper interpretation. And like with any one of these play-alongs, you can go into the timestamps and you can slow this one down as slow as 20 beats a minute, or you can go as fast as 160 beats a minute and everything in between. All you have to do is just click on it, and then again, it will immediately start tapping you off so that you can practice this. 161 videos in here that are specifically working on splits timing, and some of these are actually like laser beams for like 3 drums, 5 drums, etc., as well as down and up splits. So that's a great way that you can work on practicing these on your own. I also have a bunch of permutations for 3, 4, 5, and 6 drums, so you can practice marching bass exercises without actually having the rest of the line there with you. The last thing I'll mention for this is the best bass drummers are also just as good at snare drum or tenor drum as a snare and tenor player. So I highly recommend working on technique exercises for improving your bass, as well as working on like grid variations. And again, there's over 900 of those that you can check out. I assumed it just kind of came easy to them, but then when they actually explained what they did to get good at that, I was like, oh, I can do that. Like Jeff Queen, I got 2 lessons from him, a 4-time world champion snare drummer. He said the way he got good is he set his metronome at 40, and he just sat there and worked on a rudiment for like 10 minutes straight. This is faster than 40, but you get the idea. And then he'd move it up 5 clicks at a time. And then he'd sit there for another 10 minutes working on that. And I was like, well, if he did it for 5 clicks, what if I do it for 1 click? And so I did that with like every rudiment. That's how he became the best. It didn't just like naturally happen for him.